The most fearsome beast in the known galaxy lay dying in a pool of its alien blood, until one brave human stepped up to do the impossible and decide the fate of trillions. "Carl, we need you now. The Hazari named Varys has been found mortally wounded on Zari Prime. You're the only one who can possibly save him." The raspy voice of Councillor Xyloth crackled through my comms implant. "If Varys dies, his clan will rip apart the galaxy." I froze, tools clattering to the ground in my veterinary medbay. Varys, the legendary Hazari Alpha, over 500 kilos of rippling muscle, venomous fangs and murderous intent, an apex predator that had never been bested in combat. I swallowed hard. "Send me the coordinates." The Galactic Council had a damned good reason to come begging to a human. We were the newest upstarts on the scene, still centuries behind in tech. But unlike the galaxy's other timid prey species, humanity had a reputation for balls and grit. I was the best xenovet around, renowned for treating the galaxy's most exotic and deadly creatures. But a Hazari? This was a tall order, even for me. If I failed, the Hazari would tear a path of revenge across 100 worlds. Billions would die in the ensuing war. There was no choice. The Galactic Council had pulled strings to get me aboard the GCS Hippocrates, a state-of-the-art medical frigate outfitted with the latest in xenobiology tech. As we set course for Zari Prime at maximum warp, I pored over what scant information the galaxy had on Hazari anatomy and behavior. "Ava, pull up that analysis of Hazari venom," I called out. The ship's AI and advanced veterinary assistant had been assigned to aid me in devising a treatment plan for Varys. A holographic display flickered to life, showing complex molecular diagrams. Based on these properties, the venom likely causes rapid necrosis and organ failure in its victims, AVA explained. However, Hazari cells exhibit remarkable regenerative capabilities. If we can isolate and synthesize the compounds responsible— I nodded, a kernel of a plan forming in my mind as AVA rattled off formulas and dosages. But as we dropped out of warp and the burnt orange sphere of Zari Prime swelled in the viewports, grim reality set in. This was the heart of Varys's territory, a hostile world where the very air was toxic to most species. The Hippocrates shuddered as it plunged into the planet's dense atmosphere, and I gripped my seat as turbulence rocked the ship. In the hangar bay, I met up with my team, Dr. Liam Reeves, a brilliant but reckless xenobiologist, and Nurse Tarkus, a burly Chronax who specialized in wrangling deadly creatures. We suited up in heavy armor and checked our weapons, knowing the planet's treacherous terrain was the least of the dangers we faced. As we piled into the drop shuttle, I saw the same look in my crewmate's eyes that I felt in my gut, a mix of fear and raw determination. We all knew the stakes. If we failed, we'd be condemning billions to death in the crossfire of the Hazari's rage. The shuttle touched down in a jagged canyon, and we stepped out into the searing heat. In the distance, towering rock formations twisted into impossible shapes, carved by eons of howling winds. "The coordinates are 2 clicks northeast," Tarkus growled, checking his wrist display. "Deep in Varys's territory. No other species has ventured that far and lived." I shouldered my medkit and took point, my heart hammering against my ribs as we set off into the labyrinth of stone. The only sounds were the crunch of our boots on loose shale and the eerie moan of the wind. But as we emerged onto a desolate plain, I spotted a dark mass lying atop a rocky outcropping. I signaled for the others to hold position and crept closer, trank gun at the ready. It was Varys. The massive Hazari lay motionless, his sides barely rising with each labored breath. His scales were cracked and oozing a viscous black liquid that pooled around his still form. I had seen critical cases before, but nothing like this. Varys was on the brink. Time was running out for him and the galaxy. My shoulders tensed as a piercing alarm split the air. Zahn and a pack of snarling Hazari hunters leapt from the shadows of a nearby ravine, energy blasters flashing. A hail of razor-sharp flechettes peppered the ground at our feet. "Get down!" Tarkus roared as he shoved me behind a towering slab of basalt. Pulse rifle whining, he sent 2 hunters crashing to the ground. Their bodies twitched and went still. Reeves crouched beside me, eyes wide. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Please, we're here to help Varys, not harm him." A crackling bolt sizzled past, close enough to singe his hair. The Hazari bellowed in their guttural tongue, the only word I recognized being enemies. I poked my head out, searching for an opening. There. Zaan stumbled as he surged forward, favoring his right hind leg. A flash of crimson caught my eye, blood oozing from a deep gash. I holstered my pistol. Tarkus shot me an incredulous look, but I shook my head. Violence wouldn't win their trust. Slowly I stood, palms facing outward. "Everyone, hold your fire," I called out. Zaan snarled, his fangs glistening with venom, but he hesitated, confused by my lack of aggression. I took a step forward, then another, murmuring soft, soothing sounds. Zaan's ears twitched. His baleful yellow eyes tracked my every move. A tense heartbeat passed. The other hunters shifted restlessly, looking to Zaan for guidance. I was close enough now to feel his hot, rank breath on my face. Zaan growled low in his throat, but remained still as I crouched beside him. I reached into my medkit, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. The wound was ugly, crusted with pus. Definitely infected. I cleaned it with a sanitizing swab, then applied a thick layer of fast-acting biofoam. Zaan flinched as the foam sizzled and hardened, but I could already see the angry inflammation receding. So I stepped back, hands raised. There, that should help. Zaan tested his weight on the leg, rumbling in surprise when he found it much improved. He barked a command, and the other hunters lowered their weapons, albeit grudgingly. At Zaan's nod, Reeves and Tarkus hustled forward, hauling the heavy diagnostic equipment from the shuttle. I knelt beside Varys's massive head, feeling for a pulse in his leathery hide. It was thready and weak. I pulled out my datapad, inputting Varys's vitals with shaking fingers. The preliminary scans were grim. Severe hemorrhaging, multiple organ failure, catastrophic amounts of venom in his bloodstream. He'd been attacked by something even more fearsome than himself. "Carl." Reeves's voice was hoarse. He held up Varys's foreleg, where a jagged, oozing bite mark stood out against the matted scales. "I've never seen a wound like this before." My blood turned to ice as a chilling roar shook the valley. Varys's glazed eyes snapped open, his jaws parting in a rasping hiss. Carl's heart sank as the scans flashed across his datapad screen. "The toxin. It's like nothing I've ever seen. It's tearing him apart from the inside." Dr. Reeves peered over his shoulder, brow furrowed. "His cell structure is degrading at an unprecedented rate. We need to act fast." Carl scrolled through the data, his mind racing. Conventional treatments wouldn't cut it, not against a poison this virulent. Then it hit him. Varys's own venom. If they could isolate the right compounds, synthesize an antidote. He looked up at Zaan, meeting the Hazari's piercing gaze. "I have an idea, but it's risky. I need to extract a sample of Varys's venom." Zaan's eyes narrowed. "His venom is deadly, even to us. 1 drop could kill you in seconds." Carl nodded grimly. "I know, but it's our only chance." With Zaan at his side, Carl approached Varys's massive head. Dr. Reeves hung back, a specialized syringe at the ready. Carl's heart pounded as he knelt beside Varys's gaping jaws, the heat of the Hazari's breath washing over him. Carefully he reached for the venom sac, the syringe hovering over the engorged gland. Just as the needle punctured the delicate membrane, Varys's eyes snapped open. With a roar that shook the ground, the Hazari lashed out, razor claws slicing the air inches from Carl's face. Zaan lunged forward, locking his burly arms around Varys's thrashing head. Muscles bulging with the strain, he held the enraged Hazari steady as Carl plunged the syringe deep. Viscous green liquid filled the vial. Varys bucked and writhed, nearly throwing Zaan off, but the Hazari hunter held fast. With a final heave, Carl yanked the syringe free, stumbling back as Varys collapsed, spent. "So I've got it," Carl panted, holding up the precious sample. Dr. Reeves snatched it, already sprinting for the shuttle's onboard lab. Carl and Zahn followed close behind, leaving Tarkus to stand guard over Varys's shuddering form. Inside the lab, Dr. Reeves hunched over the centrifuge, his face bathed in the glow of flickering screens. Carl paced, listening to the steady beep of the biomonitor, relaying Varys's vitals from outside. Each tone seemed weaker than the last. "His system is shutting down," Tarkus's voice crackled over the comm. "Whatever you're doing in there, do it faster." Carl slammed his fist against the bulkhead, frustration and desperation warring in his gut. They were so close, but close wasn't enough. Not when the fate of billions hung in the balance. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to think. There had to be another way, something they hadn't tried. And then, like a bolt of lightning, it struck him. The toxin itself. What if, instead of fighting it, they could use it? "The poison is shutting down his immune response," Carl said, whirling to face Dr. Reeves. "But what if we could jumpstart it, stimulate his body to fight back?" Dr. Reeves frowned. "You want to inject him with more of the toxin? That's insane." Carl grabbed the vial of venom, already running for the shuttle door. Zahn fell into step beside him, understanding dawning in his eyes. They skidded to a halt beside Varys, the Hazari's breaths coming in ragged gasps. Carl filled a syringe with the lethal liquid, his hands shaking. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and it would all be over. Carl positioned the syringe over Varys's heart, the needle hovering above the thick scales. He took a deep breath and plunged it home. For a single, terrifying heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Varys convulsed, his massive body going rigid. The biomonitor screamed, the readout flatlining as Varys's heart stuttered to a halt. "No, no, no," Carl whispered, staring at the screen in horror. Beside him, Zahn let out a low, keening moan. But then, impossibly, a single blip appeared on the monitor. Then another and another, growing stronger and steadier with each passing second. Varys's chest rose and fell, his breathing evening out. Carl sagged back on his heels, hardly daring to believe it. Somehow, against all odds, it had worked. Varys was alive. The galaxy was safe. For now, at least. As Varys's eyes slowly blinked open, Carl knew their fight was far from over. The chilling roar still echoed in his ears, a grim reminder of the horrors that lurked in Zari Prime's shadowed depths. Horrors that even now were stirring, drawn by the scent of blood and the promise of new prey. As Varys's eyes flickered open, Carl slumped against the rocky outcropping, exhaustion and relief warring in his chest. They had done it. Against all odds, they had brought the Hazari leader back from the brink. But there was no time to rest. Zahn approached, his expression grim. "There is something you must know," he growled, his voice low and urgent. "The attack on Varys was no accident. It was orchestrated by a rogue faction within your galactic council." Carl's blood ran cold. "What? Who would dare—" "A corrupt politician named Zod." Zahn spat the name like a curse. "He seeks to destabilize the galaxy, to seize power for himself. He hired mercenaries to poison Varys, to frame your kind for the crime." Carl's mind raced, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. If the Hazari believed humanity responsible for the attempt on Varys's life, the consequences would be catastrophic. War on a galactic scale, billions of lives snuffed out in the crossfire. "I've been tracking the mercenaries," Zahn continued. "I know where they came from and I know who they serve. Zod must be exposed, his treachery laid bare for all to see." Carl nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll find the proof we need to clear humanity's name and bring Zod to justice." He turned to his team, their faces haggard but resolute. "Gear up, we're not finished yet." With Varys's blessing, they set out, the Hazaris' growled oaths of vengeance ringing in their ears. Their target, a secret base hidden on a nearby moon, a dark pit of vipers where Zod's mercenaries lurked. The infiltration was tense, every shadow a potential threat. They moved silently through the stark metal corridors, Carl's heart pounding a staccato beat against his ribs. And then they found it. A cache of the very poison used against Varys, damning documents scattered amongst the vials, shipment manifests, encrypted communications, all linking back to Zod like a trail of bloody footprints. "We've got it," Carl breathed, scooping up the evidence with shaking hands. "Let's get the hell out of here." But as they turned to go, all hell broke loose. Alarms blared, blast doors slamming shut with a bone-jarring clang. Zod's private security force poured into the room, blasters spitting deadly fire. Carl dove for cover, his own weapon leaping into his hands. Beside him, Tarkus roared, his massive frame shuddering as a hail of blaster bolts stitched across his armor. They fought like cornered beasts, desperation fueling every shot, every frantic heartbeat. But the guards kept coming, an endless tide of faceless foes. A searing lance of pain tore through Carl's shoulder, sending him staggering. Through the haze of agony he saw Tarkus fall, a smoking hole in his chest. "No!" Carl screamed, lurching to his friend's side. With trembling hands he dragged the wounded Kronax behind a crate, his veterinary training taking over as he stemmed the bleeding with a pressure bandage. But it wasn't enough. The guards were closing in, their blasters leveled at Carl's head. This was it, the end of the line. And then, like an avenging angel, Varys was there. The Hazari warrior burst into the room, a host of his fiercest hunters at his back. They fell upon the guards like a tidal wave of claws and fury, tearing through their ranks with savage efficiency. Caught between the hammer of Varys's wrath and the anvil of Carl's desperate stand, the guards broke and ran. The tide had turned. But as he looked around at the battered remnants of his team, at the blood-staining Tarkus's armor, Carl knew their fight was far from over. Zod would not go quietly. And somewhere out there, in the shadowed depths of space, an even greater threat lurked. The horrors that had brought Varys low, the nightmare creatures drawn by the scent of blood and strife, they were still out there, waiting. And Carl knew, with a grim certainty that settled in his bones, that he would face them again. Carl and his team burst into the Galactic Council chambers, the evidence of Zod's treachery clutched tightly in their hands. The councillors' eyes widened as they took in the battered but determined group, Varys looming behind them like a silent guardian. "Councillor Zod is a traitor," Carl declared, his voice ringing through the stunned silence. "He orchestrated the attack on Varys, tried to frame humanity for the crime. It's all here in these documents." He thrust the damning files toward the nearest councillor, but before they could take them, the chamber doors slammed open. A tall, wiry figure strode in, flanked by a phalanx of heavily armed guards. "Well, well," Zod sneered, his eyes glinting with malice. "The intrepid veterinarian and his band of misfits. I must admit I underestimated you." Carl's jaw clenched. "It's over, Zod. We have the proof of your crimes." With a mocking salute, he turned on his heel and vanished, his guards closing ranks behind him. For a moment Carl could only stare after him, a sinking feeling in his gut. Carl nodded grimly. "Then that's where we're going. We have to stop him before it's too late." As they raced back to the Hippocrates, Carl's mind whirled with strategies and contingencies. Zod was cunning and ruthless, with a keen understanding of galactic politics. Beating him would require more than just brawn and bravery. The journey to Nemesis Prime was tense, each member of the team lost in their own thoughts. Carl pored over star maps and intelligence reports, trying to piece together Zod's plan. Varys paced the ship's corridors, a caged predator ready to be unleashed. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace above the seething neon-lit planet, Carl felt a shiver run down his spine. Nemesis Prime was a den of iniquity, a place where the strong preyed on the weak and the law held no sway. As they descended into the smoggy atmosphere, Carl caught sight of the sprawling capital city, a tangle of twisted metal and pulsing lights. Somewhere in that labyrinth, Zod was gathering his forces, preparing to strike. They landed on the outskirts, the ship's ramp lowering with a hiss of hydraulics. Carl stepped out into the fetid air, his hand resting on the butt of his blaster. Beside him, Tarkus cracked his knuckles, his eyes scanning the shadows. "We need intel," Carl said, pulling up a holomap of the city. "Zod's compound is well hidden. We'll have to do this the hard way." And so they plunged into the neon-soaked streets, a ragtag band of heroes in a city of villains. They moved quickly and quietly, dodging the leering gazes of the city's denizens. Carl's heart pounded in his ears as they slipped down trash-strewn alleys and navigated crowded bazaars, always alert for any sign of Zod's men. It was Zahn who found the lead they needed, extracting the information from a sniveling informant with a flash of his fangs. Zod's compound, it seemed, lay hidden in the industrial district, a fortress of steel and concrete. But as they drew closer, Carl realized the compound was far too heavily guarded for a frontal assault. They would need a distraction, something to draw Zod's forces away from their posts. And then it hit him, the Groks, vicious, uncontrollable predators, the scourge of Nemesis Prime's underworld. If they could lure a pack of them into the compound... It was a desperate plan, but they were out of options. Carl and Varys set out to capture the beasts using every trick Carl had learned in his years as a xeno-veterinarian. It was harrowing work, the Groks fighting with savage fury, but finally they had a snarling, snapping pack, ready to be unleashed. As night fell over the city, they made their move. Carl released the Groks at the compound's perimeter, the creatures immediately bounding forward, their howls piercing the air. Alarms blared, and guards shouted as the beasts tore through the compound, leaving chaos in their wake. In the confusion, Carl and his team slipped inside, racing through the corridors with weapons drawn. They burst into the command center, Zod spinning to face them with a snarl of rage. "You!" he spat, his hand dropping to his blaster. "I should have killed you when I had the chance." Carl's eyes locked with Zod's, the air between them crackling with tension. The corrupt counselor sneered, a triumphant glint in his eye. "You're too late," Zod gloated. "Behold my greatest weapon." With a dramatic flourish, he unveiled a sleek, sinister-looking device. Its surface pulsed with an eerie blue light, tendrils of energy snaking out to ensnare the minds of the Hazari warriors. Zahn and his hunters stiffened, their eyes glazing over as the device's insidious influence took hold. They turned as one, claws unsheathing, fangs bared in a snarl. Carl's heart sank as he realized the true extent of Zod's madness. The counselor meant to enslave the galaxy, bending entire species to his twisted will. But Varys remained unaffected, his venom-enhanced physiology resisting the device's siren call. With a roar of defiance, the Hazari Alpha charged, his loyal warriors close behind. Chaos erupted in the command center. Carl and his team found themselves caught between the mind-controlled Hazari and Zod's fanatical guards. Blaster fire filled the air, the acrid scent of ozone mingling with the coppery tang of blood. Carl ducked and weaved, his veterinary reflexes serving him well as he dodged slashing claws and sizzling energy beams. Beside him, Tarkus grappled with a snarling Hazari, the two titans locked in a deadly embrace. Through the melee, Carl caught a glimpse of the mind control device, its pulsing light the eye of the storm. If they could just reach it, shut it down. "Varys," he shouted over the din of battle, "the device, we have to destroy it." The Hazari leader nodded, his eyes blazing with fierce determination. Together they fought their way across the room, a whirlwind of fang and blaster fire. But Zod's guards were relentless, throwing themselves at the duo with reckless abandon. Carl felt the searing kiss of an energy bolt as it grazed his shoulder, the pain nearly sending him to his knees. Varys was there in an instant, his massive form shielding Carl from the worst of the onslaught. With a sweep of his mighty tail, he sent a cluster of guards flying, their bodies crumpling against the far wall. Finally, they reached the device's control panel. Carl's fingers flew over the alien interface, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the complex system. Sweat beaded on his brow as he worked, the sounds of battle fading to a distant roar. He could feel Varys at his back, the Hazari's breath hot on his neck as he fended off wave after wave of attackers. Just as Carl thought his luck had run out, the device gave a shuddering whine, the light fading from its surface. The mind-controlled Hazari slumped to the ground, the spell broken. Zod's howl of rage split the air, his face twisted in a mask of hatred. He turned to flee but found his path blocked by Varys and Zaan, the two Hazari warriors looming over him like avenging angels. In a last, desperate gambit, Zod whipped out a hidden blaster, leveling it squarely at Karl's chest. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to the glowing muzzle of the weapon. But Varys was faster. With a speed that belied his size, the Hazari Alpha lunged, throwing himself between Karl and certain death. The blaster bolt caught him square in the chest, the force of the impact sending him crashing to the ground. "No!" Karl screamed, rushing to Varys' side. The Hazari leader lay still, his breathing shallow and labored. Karl's hands shook as he fumbled for his medkit, his mind racing through every scrap of xenobiological knowledge he possessed. He had to stabilize Varys, had to keep him alive. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. As he worked frantically to stem the bleeding, Karl could hear the sounds of battle dying down around him. Zod's forces were in retreat, their leader's grand plan lying in ruins. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was the life ebbing away beneath Karl's desperate hands. He poured every ounce of skill and determination into his efforts, refusing to let Varys slip away. The Hazari's eyes fluttered open, his gaze locking with Karl's. In that moment, a bond deeper than words passed between them, a connection forged in the crucible of shared struggle and sacrifice. Varys's jaws parted, a rasping whisper escaping his lips. "Karl, you must finish this, for the sake of the galaxy." Karl nodded, tears stinging his eyes. "I will, Varys, I swear it, but you have to stay with me. The galaxy needs you. I need you." The Hazari's eyes drifted closed, his body going limp in Karl's arms. But the rise and fall of his chest continued, a fragile thread of hope in the darkness. Karl rose to his feet, his shoulders squared with newfound resolve. Zod may have been defeated, but the true threat still lurked out there, waiting in the shadows. And Karl would be ready for it, no matter the cost. For he was more than just a veterinarian now. He was a guardian, a protector of the innocent, and he would not rest until the galaxy was safe, once and for all. As Karl watched over Varys' recovering form, the elation of their hard-fought victory was short-lived. The comms unit on his wrist chimed with an incoming distress call. Dr. Reeves's face flickered onto the screen, his expression grim. "Karl, we have a situation on Zari Prime," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "A virus is tearing through the Hazari population. It's causing rapid tissue degeneration and organ failure. I've never seen anything like it." Varys stirred, his eyes narrowing as he overheard the conversation. "My people," he rasped. "We must go to them." Karl nodded, his jaw set. "Dr. Reeves, do what you can to contain the outbreak. We're on our way." The Hippocrates tore through the void, its engines straining as they pushed the ship to its limits. In the medbay, Karl pored over the data Dr. Reeves had sent, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The virus targets a specific protein found only in Hazari cells," he muttered, scrolling through the genetic sequences. "But Varys's unique makeup, there might be a way." As soon as they touched down on Zari Prime, the extent of the crisis became clear. The Hazari lay strewn across the rocky terrain, their once mighty forms reduced to shuddering, wheezing shells. Dr. Reeves's makeshift triage center overflowed with the sick and dying. Karl and Varys leapt into action, their movements urgent and precise. They worked tirelessly, administering what treatments they could, but it was a losing battle. The virus spread with terrifying speed, leaving devastation in its wake. In the ship's lab, Karl and Dr. Reeves labored over the samples they'd collected, their eyes bloodshot and hands shaking from exhaustion. They synthesized serum after serum, each one a desperate gamble. But even as he said it, he knew they were out of time. The virus had spread too far, the Hazari too weakened. There was no time for proper trials, no time for caution. Karl loaded the serum into a syringe, his hand hovering over his own arm. Varys's eyes widened in realization. "Karl, no," growled. "Dangerous." Karl shook his head. I have to, we're out of options. Carl doubled over, his vision swimming. He could hear shouting, feel hands on his shoulders, but it all seemed so far away. A blackness was creeping in at the edges of his sight, a yawning void that threatened to swallow him whole. But even as he teetered on the brink of oblivion, Carl's mind remained fixed on one thing, the fate of Varys and his people. He had to hold on, had to fight. The galaxy needed him. There was no turning back now. For an agonizing moment, Carl teetered on the brink of unconsciousness, the experimental vaccine ravaging his system. His muscles seized, his vision blurred, and a searing pain radiated from his core. But just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm passed. Carl's eyes snapped open, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Dr. Reeves was at his side in an instant, scanner in hand. "Vital stabilizing," the doctor reported, relief evident in his voice. "No signs of cellular degradation. I think it worked." Carl pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaky but holding. He felt a newfound energy thrumming through his veins, a sense of purpose and determination. They had a cure. Now, they just had to get it to the Hazari. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Reeves and Carl worked tirelessly to synthesize more of the vaccine, while Tarkus and Zahn coordinated the distribution efforts. They set up makeshift inoculation centers across Zari Prime, working to reach even the most remote Hazari settlements. So it was grueling work, the team pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion. But as the days passed, their efforts began to bear fruit. The virus's spread slowed, then halted altogether. Hazari, who had been on the brink of death, began to recover, their scales regaining their luster, their strength returning. Carl stood beside Varys, watching as a young Hazari received her dose of the vaccine. The child's mother wept with joy, clutching her daughter close. Carl felt a lump form in his throat. They had done it. They had saved a species. But their triumph was short-lived. A sudden commotion drew Carl's attention, shouts of alarm rising from the perimeter of the inoculation center. He turned to see a group of armed figures storming through the entrance, weapons raised. So at their head was a hulking brute of a man, his face a mass of scars and cybernetic implants. Crag, Zod's most ruthless enforcer. Carl's heart sank as he realized the mercenaries' intent. They were here to destroy the vaccine, to undo all the team's hard work. Carl stepped forward, placing himself between Crag and the precious vials of vaccine. "You're too late," he said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "The Hazari are already recovering. You've lost." Crag sneered, his cybernetic eye glowing an eerie red. "We'll see about that," he growled, and lunged at Carl with a speed that belied his size. Carl barely had time to react, his body moving on instinct. He dodged Crag's first blow, the mercenary's fist whistling past his ear. Carl countered with a strike of his own, his knuckles cracking against Crag's jaw. But Crag was relentless, a whirlwind of cybernetically enhanced fury. Carl found himself on the defensive, blocking and dodging as best he could. He could hear the sounds of battle raging around him, Tarkus and Zahn engaging Crag's men. Carl knew he had to end this quickly. The longer the fight went on, the greater the risk to the vaccine. He feinted left, then dove right, rolling under Crag's outstretched arm. As he came up behind the mercenary, Carl's fingers found the pressure point he was looking for, a cluster of nerves at the base of the neck. He pressed hard and Crag stiffened, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. The mercenary's knees buckled and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Carl stood over him, chest heaving, adrenaline still surging through his system. Around him, the battle was winding down. Tarkus and Zahn had made short work of Crag's men, the last of the attackers falling to a well-placed blast from Tarkus's pulse rifle. Carl sagged with relief, the realization that they had won washing over him like a wave. But there was no time to rest. The vaccine still needed to be distributed. The Hazari still needed their help. Carl squared his shoulders, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had come too far to fail now. News of their victory over Zod and the successful containment of the engineered virus spread quickly across Zari Prime and beyond. In the days that followed, the Hazari population began to recover, the once crowded triage centers emptying as the sick and wounded returned to their clans. But even as they celebrated this hard-won respite, Carl and his team knew their work was far from over. Dr. Reeves, hunched over a glowing data pad in the Hippocrates lab, called them over with a grim expression. "I've been analyzing the virus's genetic structure," he said, his voice tight, "and I've found something deeply troubling. This virus, it's not just Zod's handiwork. There are markers here, patterns that suggest a far more extensive conspiracy." He tapped the screen, bringing up a complex web of interlocking symbols. "Have you ever heard of the shadow light?" Carl shook his head, a feeling of unease settling in his gut. "They're a secret society," Dr. Reeves explained. "Ancient and powerful. They've been manipulating galactic events for centuries, always from the shadows. And from what I can tell, they had a hand in engineering this virus." Tarkus slammed a fist into his palm. "So Zod was just a pawn, a tool of this shadow light?" "It appears so," Dr. Reeves nodded. "Which means our fight is just beginning. We have to find out what the shadow light's endgame is and stop them before they can do more harm." Carl turned to Varys, expecting to see the same determination in the Hazari leader's eyes. But Varys wouldn't meet his gaze, his massive shoulders hunched as if under a great weight. "Varys?" Carl asked, a cold suspicion forming in his mind. "What is it?" Varys's claws flexed, his tail swishing in agitation. "Carl, there's something you need to know about the shadow light and about me." The Hazari drew in a deep breath as if steeling himself. "I was once one of them, a member of the shadow light." Carl stared at him in shock, a sense of betrayal welling up in his chest. "What?" "Many cycles ago," Varys continued, his voice heavy, "I was tasked with infiltrating the Hazari, guiding their evolution to serve the shadow light's purposes. It was all I knew, all I believed in." He met Carl's eyes then, his gaze pleading. "But that changed when I met you, Carl. When I saw the bravery and compassion of you and your team, you showed me that there was another way, a better path." Carl clenched his jaw, struggling to process this revelation. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was ashamed," Varys admitted. "Ashamed of what I had been, of the things I had done in the shadow light's name. But I swear to you, Carl, my loyalty now lies with my people and with you." For a long moment Carl was silent, his mind racing. Then slowly he extended his hand. "Okay," he said. "I believe you. But if we're going to take on the shadow light, we're going to need your help. You know them better than anyone." Varys clasped Carl's hand, his grip firm. "I will do whatever it takes to stop them," he vowed, "to protect my people and the galaxy." As they began to plan their next move, Carl couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something far greater and more dangerous than they had ever faced before. But with his team at his side and Varys's knowledge of the enemy, he knew they would face it together no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.